Faith and folly. It was a Sunday morning, and the small church buzzed with anticipation. The congregation of Light of Faith Ministry had gathered as they always did to hear the fiery words of Pastor Mike. Among them sat Daniel, a young man in his early 30s, married to his beautiful wife Sarah, and a father to a 3-year-old boy. Daniel had always been a devout Christian. He and Sarah had built their marriage on the foundation of prayer and trust. They struggled financially, but they managed to make ends meet. However, as weeks turned into months, Pastor Mike's sermons began to gnaw at Daniel's soul. "Poverty is not your portion," the pastor bellowed one fateful Sunday, his voice rising like a total wave. "Poverty is a curse, a sin against the abundance that God has promised His children. Can you call yourself a child of God and yet struggle to pay your rent? Where is your faith? You can't pay your children's school fees on time. Your children are sent home every now and then. That is not the plan of God. You are bringing shame and reproach to His name." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had heard this message before, but today it felt as though the pastor was speaking directly to him. Hear what the Bible said in Proverbs 10:15. Pastor Mike continued. "The rich man's wealth is a strong city, but the destruction of the poor is their poverty." Did you hear that? Poverty will take you to hell, a place of destruction. That night, as Daniel sat in the small living room of their modest apartment, the words replayed in his mind. Sarah sat beside him, nursing their son. "Daniel, you've been quiet all evening," Sarah said softly. "Is something bothering you?" "Sarah," he began, hesitating, "do you think Pastor Mike is right? Do you think poverty is a sin?" Sarah paused, her brow furrowing. "I think he's trying to motivate us to strive for better, but I don't believe God punishes us for being poor. We are doing our best, aren't we?" "But is our best enough?" Daniel's voice was almost a whisper. "Look at us, Sarah. We are barely surviving. How long can we live like this?" Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "God's timing is perfect, Daniel. We just have to keep trusting Him." But Daniel wasn't convinced. He had heard too many stories of people who had moved from rags to riches through means he couldn't bring himself to name. That night, as Sarah and their son slept peacefully, Daniel lay awake, wrestling with his thoughts. A week later, Daniel found himself in the unlikeliest of places, a small dimly lit herbalist hut on the outskirts of town. He had resisted the urge to come here for weeks, but desperation had driven him. The herbalist, an older man with piercing eyes and a deep voice, studied Daniel carefully. "You seek wealth," he stated, rather than asked. "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice shaky. "I need a better life for my family. I've prayed, I've fasted, but nothing has changed. I need something more." The herbalist nodded slowly. "The gods can grant you wealth, but every gift comes at a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" Daniel hesitated. "What kind of price?" "That will depend on what the gods require. Are you ready?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes," he said. The herbalist handed him a small calabash with a dark, viscous liquid. "Drink this tonight and wealth will come to you. But remember, it is not just money that binds men, it is the consequences of their choices." At first, it seemed the herbalist had kept his promise. Within weeks, Daniel's fortunes changed. He landed a lucrative contract at work, and soon money began pouring in. He moved his family into a new house, bought a car, and even started a business. Pastor Mike noticed the transformation and praised Daniel during the service. "This is what I mean when I say God rewards faith. Look at Brother Daniel, he has claimed his blessing." But as the weeks turned into months, strange things began to happen. Daniel was plagued by nightmares, shadowy figures chasing him, whispering ominous words he couldn't understand. He woke up in cold sweat, his heart pounding. His relationship with Sarah also began to deteriorate. She noticed his sudden mood swings, the way he avoided her questions about his newfound wealth, and the dark circles under his eyes. "Daniel," she said one evening, her voice filled with concern, "what's going on? You are not the man I married." "I'm fine," he snapped, avoiding her gaze. "Why can't you just enjoy what we have?" "But at what cost?" she pressed. The breaking point came one fateful night. Daniel woke up to find their son crying uncontrollably. Sarah tried to soothe him, but the boy pointed to the corner of the room, his face pale with fear. "There is a man there," he cried. "He is looking at me." But when Daniel and Sarah turned, the corner was empty. The incident escalated. Daniel began hearing voices, seeing shadows out of the corner of his eyes. His wealth, once a source of joy, now felt like a curse. Desperate, he returned to the herbalist. "You didn't tell me this would happen," he shouted. The herbalist remained calm. "I told you every gift comes at a price. The spirits demand something in return." "What do they want?" Daniel demanded. The herbalist's expression darkened. "Your son." Daniel stumbled out of the hut. He smiled reeling. He wouldn't sacrifice his child. He had to find another way. But how can he save his son? "God, what have I done to myself? How can I sacrifice my innocent son? What will I tell my wife? After him, who will be next? Perhaps my wife also. Oh God, please help me," he groaned. "You need to confess your sin so you'll be forgiven," he heard clearly in his spirit, but he ignored the voice. "I can't do it. What will my wife think of me? And the church, how will I show my face?" Daniel kept having nightmares, and the son continued to see shadows, until one night, his son screamed in the middle of the night. His wife woke up first and ran to their son's room. He was lying on the bed, screaming and pointing to the wall. "Mommy, see! That man over there is holding a knife. He wants to stab me." Daniel also came in at that moment. He knew the truth. His heart broke when the son said, "Daddy, Daddy, save me." Sarah didn't know what was going on, but she shouted, "Jesus," looking at the direction the boy was pointing at. "He has gone," the boy suddenly said, holding his mother tight. "Mommy, I want to sleep with you. The man might come back." That night, they all huddled together on the same bed, each with his own thought. Though the poor boy fell asleep immediately, Daniel couldn't sleep. He had to do something, or they might eventually lose the child. One Saturday evening, Daniel was alone at home. Sarah had gone out with their son. He was sitting in the living room, still in a pensive mood. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared to him. "Daniel, you have been stubborn to release your son. Well, in 2 days' time, we are coming for him. Nothing goes for nothing. And not only him this time, but your wife as well." Before Daniel could utter any word, the spirit disappeared. For the first time in months, he fell to his knees and prayed. "God, I have sinned. I turned away from you because I was impatient and greedy. Please save my family. I'll do anything." The next day, Daniel confessed everything to Sarah. She was devastated, but agreed to help him seek deliverance. They approached Pastor Mike, who, though shocked, promised to intercede on their behalf. Some key leaders of the church gathered for a prayer session, and the elders laid hands on Daniel and his son, praying fervently. He cried out to God, begging for forgiveness. But suddenly, they all felt an eerie presence. A figure appeared and pointed at Daniel's son. "We have come for our prize. Since you don't want to release him freely, we shall take him by force," he said. "No, you can't take my son," Sarah shouted, grabbing her son and holding him tight. The pastor and the members praying were so shocked. Some were even scared. They've only witnessed a scene like this in the movies. "You foul spirit, I bind you in Jesus' name," Pastor Mike said. The spirit shook violently and pointed at Daniel before disappearing. Immediately, Daniel started laughing strangely and ran out of the church. Sarah quickly left her son and ran after him with some men. "Daniel, Daniel, come back," she shouted. But before they could get to him, he had disappeared into the night. They all returned into the church sadly. Sarah cried uncontrollably. "Pastor, this is all your fault. You pushed my husband into this with your preachings," Sarah wailed to the surprise of everyone. Pastor Mike couldn't say a word. He was still dazed at the event that unfolded. He remembered his sermons as it replayed in his head. He couldn't help but agree with her and blame himself. For days, Daniel could not be found. Sarah combed the nook and cranny of the vicinity, but there was no trace. He just seemed to vanish. Pastor Mike was restless. Where could this man be? "God, please help me." He fasted and prayed. "Forgive me, Lord. In any way I have led your people astray. I promise to retrace my steps. Please restore Daniel and bring him back." He prayed throughout the night. It was a long and grueling night, but by morning, Daniel walked into the church, looking lean and tattered. Pastor Mike saw him and ran to hug him. "Daniel, where have you been?" "I don't know. I just saw myself on a rubbish dump and then remembered we were praying, so I came here." "God, I thank you for your mercy. You've actually been gone for days. You've searched everywhere. I'm so sorry for the messages that led you astray. Please forgive me." "It is not your fault, Pastor. I was greedy and impatient too, and I ignored God's warning." Pastor Mike prayed for him again. He took his bath and changed his clothes. He felt a peace he hadn't known in months. The shadows were gone, the voices silenced, though he had tasted madness for a few days. He later went home to Sarah and his son, who were happy to have him back. Daniel sold the business and gave most of the money to charity. He and Sarah returned to their modest life, but this time they were content. Pastor Mike also addressed the church on some of his misleading sermons and asked to be forgiven. Daniel was asked to share his testimony that Sunday for others to learn. Poverty is not a sin, Daniel told his sons years later, but greed is. Trust God and His blessings will come in His time. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but one that will guide him for the rest of his life. The end. Thanks for listening. Our dear pastors, let's be careful of what we preach so as to protect and preserve the flock. Let us all beware of greed and trust God for His blessings. Thanks for listening again. Don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts on this story. And please support this channel by subscribing. Until I come your way again another video. Bye.